In 1998, I was a 24-year-old new hire at an architectural firm in Seattle. The pay was good, and I loved the work. I was never much of a spender. Having come from a relatively poor family, I was more frugal and saved most of what I made. Time certainly flies, as they say, when you're engaged and busy, and the next thing I knew, a decade at the firm had passed. I still loved the work, but now in my early 30s, I began to feel like something was missing. You might think the feeling was from the fact I was still single, and perhaps was thinking I was missing out on family and a relationship, but that wasn't it at all. I had a relatively healthy social life and dated on occasion, but never really saw myself as a get married and start a family kind of guy. I wanted to be married to the sea. As absolutely ridiculous as that may sound, it's all I ever really thought about on my downtime. The absolute glory of the ocean. I had grown up reading unlikely classic books such as Moby Dick and The Old Man and the Sea, and always felt I belonged out there in the blue. Life, of course, had other ideas, and another decade elapsed. I was now 44, and believe it or not, had saved more than enough money to fully retire, and retire I did. I had a plan, of course. I wasn't simply retiring out of boredom or necessity. I wanted to pursue my dream of sailing the ocean expanse alone on a sailboat. Years prior, I had purchased a small 1980 Ocean Custom 60 schooner. It needed quite a bit of work, and so over the years I slowly restored him, and it was when I had completely finished the restoration that I realized it was time to retire and set sail. I had meticulously planned and packed my supplies for my oceanic adventure, and had already located a harbor on the west coast and made preparations to transport my vessel. When the day finally came to set sail, it was surreal, and the Washington weather couldn't have been more picturesque. The sound of seagulls and waves gently bumping against the dock while the salty smell of the ocean engulfed my senses. It was magical. And as I undocked my schooner, which I affectionately named Old Man, I couldn't help but think, why didn't I do this sooner? The winds were fair, and before I knew it, I was off at a speed of 5 knots. I can't even explain the joy I was feeling. Every creaking sound of the vessel, the waves against the hull, the wind in my hair, was like a dream. The goal was to sail from Washington to Kodiak, Alaska. No easy feat, as the trip would be over 2,000 miles, and take 1.5 months. The boat was well provisioned, and leaving in the month of June meant, with any luck, the weather and seas would be manageable. Watching the sunset that first evening was beyond words, and as the sun fell, the night sky presented the cosmos before me. For anyone who has not solo sailed, explaining the sensation of being completely alone on the black ocean at night, looking up at the stars, is impossible to describe. It humbles you. The winds were fair, and I slept a deep, peaceful sleep like I had never known before. The sunrise was equally impressive, and there was a warm and welcoming sensation to waking to the golden morning. I brewed some hot coffee and looked out at the endless sea. I thought ahead of the coast of British Columbia, which would be my midpoint, and 3 weeks into the expedition. I could barely contain my excitement. Midday, however, a storm approached, and retracting the sails and sealing myself in the cabin was not nearly as magical. The storm was not terrible, but I soon realized the Old Man was not the best vessel to handle rough seas. I became seasick for the first time, and as the storm lasted hours, I must say I was more than elated when it finally ended. I watched the black-gray storm clouds approach the horizon as the sun began to set, flicks of lightning illuminating the gray clouds as they drifted farther into the distance. Night came soon after, and oddly, the winds stopped completely. This was fine, as the sails were down, and I would be going to sleep soon, but there was something very disturbing about there being no breeze. A sailboat without wind, even temporarily, is a disturbing phenomenon. That night, I could not sleep. 3 a.m., and still I was wide awake, and the slapping of the waves against the hull did not soothe me. In fact, I was surprised to realize the sound irritated me. I was only 2 days into my expedition, and already I was becoming complacent of the sea. Definitely not a good sign. I imagined the seafarers of old and the horrors they must have endured, the claustrophobia, disease, isolation, and absolute submission to the whims of nature. My negative thoughts surprised me. It was then suddenly the sailboat struck something. The impact was strong enough to toss me out of my bunk and scared me so badly I felt as though I would have a heart attack. My heart racing, I opened the hatch and made my way to the deck, and what I saw changed my attitude completely. There, beside my boat, was a hulking black form, easily twice the size of my vessel. It effortlessly rose beside me and then descended into the black depths, only to rise again, spouting water as it did. In the silence, the spouting sound was amplified, and it took my mind longer than expected to process that this massive form and sound was emanating from a whale. I would love to tell you the type of whale it was, or just how large its actual size was, but all there was to observe was the black hulking mass rising and descending until it became tired of toying with my vessel and descended into the deep, never to rise again. I tell you, my attitude completely changed. This was a new experience, and one that left me in shock and awe. The sea was magical. I dare not forget that, and I felt love and respect for the ocean once again. I realized about 4 a.m. that I wasn't going back to sleep. The whale had made sure of that, so I brewed some coffee and sat on the deck, peacefully drifting in the black and looking up at the stars. After a few minutes, I saw a peculiar reflection in the sea. It was a circular reflection of purple light. I instinctively looked to the heavens to see what the source could be, but quickly realized there was nothing in the sky to cause such a reflection. The circular light was roughly 200 feet in front of the boat, and as I stared at it for a few minutes, I noticed it was most definitely becoming brighter. The circular light was roughly 200 feet in front of the boat, and as I stared at it for a few minutes, I noticed it was most definitely becoming brighter. The circle was approximately 50 feet in diameter, and it quickly went from average brightness to brilliant, and the disc-shaped light was so blinding bright I almost could not stare directly at it. And as I cast my eyes to the horizon, I noticed 2 green lights. The green lights then changed to red, then yellow, and soon it became clear the lights were spherical and approaching my location at incredible speed. Suddenly the lights were above the brilliant disc in the water, and as they hovered approximately 20 feet above it, they immediately turned from yellow to purple and matched the color of the submerged disc. It was as though I was paralyzed in shock. I could not begin to comprehend what I was seeing. I noticed dull wisps of smoke that seemed to connect from the submerged disc to the floating spheres, but after a few minutes, as I drifted another 50 feet or so toward the lights, I could hear the sound of turbulent water and suddenly realized the wispy connective smoke was not smoke at all, but instead it was funnels of water surging up from the submerged disc and traveling to the sphere. It was the most irrational and indescribable experience of my life. Then, without warning, all the lights went out. I expected to hear some mechanical sound, something familiar that would allow me to comprehend what I had seen, and yet the only audible sound from the vicinity of the lights was the sound of water crashing down onto the surface of the sea, presumably from the water funnels collapsing. I stayed awake, staring at the sea, not moving at all for hours until the gold light of the morning sun peaked above the horizon. I can't tell you what I felt when the sun rose. Was it relief? The closest thing I could compare it to was a feeling of finality. I felt a sense of closure. I never finished my expedition. That morning, I turned around and used the diesel engines to return the way I came. I sold my boat and maintained a solitary, contemplative life, as I still do to this day. I cannot tell you what I witnessed emerge from the black depths of the sea that fateful night, but I can tell you with absolute certainty 3 things. It was not an animal, it was not man-made, and the sea is magical. I dare not forget that.